This meeting is now being recorded.
So we just do this in case you want to go back and listen to this at a later time, or if you have a colleague who wasn't able to join today and you want to refer them to this. I will make this available in our Google Drive, and as always, I'll send out instructions in the coming days. Sometimes it takes a couple of days for the recording to become available, but once it is, I will send out instructions over our listserv about how to access that. It's usually too large of a file for me to email, which is why I upload it to our online portal. So if you've not used this webinar software before, just a couple quick reminders. You should be seeing a tree or a nature background at the moment. When the presentations begin, you should see those presentations. If you have any problems, please send me or Courtney Cameron, and she's just C. Cameron, I believe. Or are you Courtney Cameron?
You can send me an email at courtney.cameron@seattlehousing.org. Or if you're just having a problem on the system, there's a message that you can send to either Abra or myself.
Yeah, and my email is just abra, A-B-R-A, @CLPHA.org. But certainly, I'm happy to troubleshoot with anyone after the fact so we don't have any problems in the future. But I think most of you have been on before. I've gone ahead and muted everyone just so that if you're typing any notes or someone pops into your office space, we don't have those distractions. So what I do want to direct your attention to is the Q&A, the little conversation bubbles you should be seeing at the top slightly right of the center of your screen. If you click on those, you can type in a question. So feel free to do that during the presentations, and then when they're over, Courtney will help facilitate that process so that they can get answered for you. If we don't have time for all the questions, we will make sure to email out answers for you. So we've had an exciting couple of weeks as CLPHA's really continued in this arena of the intersection of housing and education. We had an Affordable Housing and Education Summit at the very end of February, which was really fantastic. It brought together housing authorities, superintendents, principals, some government folks, foundations, and then other community organizations, and it was really great to have a lot of people in one room and talk more in depth about these issues. We also had a half-day Affordable Housing and Education Symposium right before our spring meeting, which was just a couple weeks ago, middle of March, and that was really just a great chance for us to distill more information and hear from other people in the room thoughts about where this work can go next. So we are definitely very excited to be involved in this, and I think it's really been a great opportunity for people most connected to this work in different communities, which I think is all of you, as well as our other colleagues who are part of this working group, to have a chance to really convene and come together. I really am excited to see where this group continues to go, and then as well, to have some CLPHA staff and some of the directors of the different housing agencies work more on the policy level around these issues. So look for updates coming your way with next steps and ideas for the future of this work and ways for you to be involved in that. So sadly, I also, as you may have seen in my email invitation for this webinar, Courtney has been a fantastic facilitator for this group. When the working group was set up, as a lot of you may remember, Courtney graciously agreed to participate in that role. It's been fantastic to work with her, but her term has come to an end. So I'm looking for replacements. So if you're interested in participating in that way, and I'm sure if you have additional questions that you wanted to discuss with myself or Courtney, I'm sure she would be happy to tell you about her experiences. But please send me an email if you're interested in that, and I'll be sending more details when I send out the recording from this webinar. The other thing that I want people to start thinking about, we've had some requests from outside people, so non-housing authority, non-CLPHA member staff, from other community organizations who are interested in participating in this working group. We certainly could create a second one that would be open to everyone, but I just wanted people to go ahead and start thinking about if they would want this group to remain just CLPHA members. I certainly think there are pros and cons to both options, but that's something that I'm going to be asking for your input on in the coming weeks, so just wanted you to go ahead and be thinking about that. And Courtney, with that, was there anything that you had wanted to add?
Thank you, Abra. I just want to add a sincere thank you to Abra, who has done an amazing job pulling us together regularly. And just a pitch for anybody who's interested in doing the facilitation role, it's been a great opportunity to get a better understanding of CLPHA's work, both at a national level and at a local level. In preparing for each of these webinars, it's an opportunity to talk with the presenters and get an understanding of their work. So if you're interested at all, I think it's an absolutely great role to take on, and I'm happy to answer any questions and think that it's really helpful as we build out the number of people who are doing this work and better connect ourselves. I think there's a lot to learn from each other. So just a little bit of a pitch that to keep this work moving forward, I think it's really important to continue this type of engagement. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and introduce Prudence. Prudence Zeni is from Vancouver Housing Authority, and she's going to be giving a presentation covering some of the context of Vancouver Housing Authority, some of their programming challenges, funding, and some of the outcomes that they're focused on. So we appreciate Prudence's willingness to present to us today. So with that, Prudence, I'll go ahead and have you take it away. And please note, as Abra said, that if you want to send questions, go ahead and send those, and then we'll ask the questions at the end of Prudence's presentation.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everybody's time, and I appreciate a lot the opportunity to participate in this group. I'm looking forward to hearing what everybody else has to say about how you guys kind of incorporate education into your services. I'm going to be talking a little bit about programming at the VHA that's kind of specific to youth. So we know that kids don't sort of come to us in a vacuum. They're supported and they're loved and they're influenced by their families. So it's kind of only reasonable to do our best to include the parents in those programs. So I'm going to hope to point out some strategies that have been particularly successful for us, as well as highlight some that have been a little bit challenging. And I can just kind of give you a sneak preview. I think that giving parents a context with which to sort of, we use a lot of tools, we use a lot of models in the programming that we do, and if we're able to talk to parents about this is why it's important, this is where attendance has an impact on future achievement, or this is where certain behaviors have impacts, it really seems to help with parent engagement just to have that context. Another thing that has been super useful is just creating opportunities for recognition. So when parents are helping their kids to go to school against sort of a lot of barriers that are happening at home, we try to recognize that the best that we can. And then finally, and I think this is sort of just this privilege that we have, given that we have this campus of learners neighborhood that's relatively small, we have this opportunity to have these personal relationships, and that always seems to help when it comes to parent engagement, both in education in the programming that we do. So I want to give you a little bit of background, and this is a little bit about the VHA. So you can see here the number of children that we serve as an entire organization, and I'm going to be talking about the Campus of Learners program, and I want to point out that that's a very small percentage of our total school-age population. That's about 7% of that 1,900 number. So even though it's pretty small, it is providing a lot of valuable information for us, and it's definitely providing a lot of valuable experience. So you can see our Resident Services Department has a wide range of programs that are focused on self-sufficiency, and most of those are for adults. However, these programs you see listed here are the array of programming that we have for children, and those are the programs I'm going to be talking about for the duration of this presentation. So this slide is a little bit about staffing and funding, and what you can see from that is that we don't have very many full-time staff who work on this type of program. The advocate positions that you see there, we have 2 advocates that work primarily with youth. Now that looks really small, I'm sorry guys. But so these advocate positions are actually residents, and those are residents of the Skyline Crest community, although many of those advocate positions are open to residents at large. I think that's it. So we'll talk about the little guys first, the early education staff. So our early education program is largely a resource and referral program that sort of sweeps across the entire scope of our population. Anybody who has someone at home who is a preschooler receives these resources. It's staffed by one full-time VHA employee and also a resident advocate. So let me show you here. The parent involvement opportunities that we have here, we have a play and learn group, and that's sort of an in-person opportunity, and we have events that are also in-person opportunities, and then we sort of have this a little bit of just a mailing campaign, I guess you would call it. So I'll talk about the in-person stuff. Play and learn happens at the community center in Skyline Crest, and it's just a group where they get together and do activities to promote readiness to learn for their kids. And their attendance really fluctuates, and I really think it goes back to what I was talking about earlier with that personal relationship, with that context. So sometimes it seems to do well, and I think that a lot of it has to do with the presence of a group. So if there are people already coming, it's a lot easier to get more people to join in. But if you have sort of a scant attendance, it's hard to build that up. It's one of the ironies of trying to get parent engagement and parent involvement is that if you don't have it, it's hard to build up. But the birthday packets and the registration and welcome packets have been pretty successful. We mail those out on a regular basis, particularly the birthday packets. So those are just packets that go out whenever a kid has a birthday that month, and they're filled with just early learning stuff, tracing letters and colors and shapes and all that kind of stuff. We also have resources in there about support groups, about play groups, about story times, those sorts of things. And then the results that we do for this program, we're all in the baseline phase for this program. So we're going to be measuring these outcomes that you see here. Jumpstart, if somebody's not familiar with that, that is really a varying program depending on the school district or even the individual school within the district, but it's intended to give kindergartners just some time at school before everyone else comes to school so they can get used to the routine and the schedule and the building and all that kind of stuff. So, gosh, I did not know that this was going to be so tiny, you guys. I'm sorry. So I hope that I can email this out, but or maybe it's not so tiny and I'm just losing my mind. But anyway, Campus of Learners is actually the program that I work with. It started about 4 or 5 years ago as part of our MCW initiative. It includes some sort of fun stuff. There's some family events. We have an attendance celebration every year. And then there's a couple requirements for each family. So the requirements for them, and this is part of their lease for living in the Skyline Crest neighborhood, the requirements are that they need to do a family plan, which it's just a yearly meeting with staff. And we go over updates for each kid just as far as academic stuff goes. We go over some education piece. Usually every year we'll talk about something that's new, something that we've learned that year about parent engagement, something that we've learned about attendance, something that we've learned about how parents can support attendance. And then we talk about a goal that that family has for the year and how they're going to be supporting their child academically. The purpose of that goal is when they're all done, when everything is done, we do those over the course of about 6 months, and when we're all done, we go over them and we see where there are similarities. So we have a tutoring program now, and that came directly from sort of that conversation that we had with parents over the course of 6 months, that we had a lot of parents saying, I don't know how to help my kids with math. So then we were able to sort of develop and grow a tutoring program at the community center. So the education piece of that, and you might not be able to see it, but there's a handout there, and some of you might be really familiar with Attendance Works. But we use Attendance Works. We use their measurements, and we use their concept of chronic absences to guide that program, that Campus of Learners program. So that chronic attendance, or chronic absence, concept was fairly new to us a couple of years ago, and I found it very helpful, particularly handouts. So instead of me sort of saying to a parent, wow, your kid, just has a bunch of absences, I'm saying, let's look at this. It's a little traffic light there. Let's look at this and let's see where they are, and let's see how that correlates to some of the stuff that you might want to see and some of the stuff that you might not want to see. So it's been helpful because it's just such an objective type of measure. And that's part of that family plan as well. All of this is sort of part of the family plan that we do. And we also talk about developmental assets, and that's that other handout that you can probably barely see. But I talk about developmental assets primarily using, and this is where I have an advantage of having this after-school program, and I can talk to parents in Skyline not so much as somebody saying how many kids, or how many developmental assets does your kid have, and why don't you try and get them more, or, can you try and get them more, but I'm more talking to them as someone who works with their kids in the after-school program and saying, this is how I structure it. I structure my activities so that I'm trying to get more developmental assets or trying to focus on a particular one in a semester. Because I acknowledge that it can kind of feel a little bit confrontational to do it the other way. So I try to, again, use a context with parents. And it seems to be useful. That's another, we'll, in a couple slides, talk about Love and Logic, which is another model that we use. But that in particular seems to be a good route to take with parents. So for me to say, I use Love and Logic when I do after-school programming and it works really well, I tend to have more parents interested in doing something like that, doing a Love and Logic class or coming to the community center to see somebody do it in person kind of. And I've actually had some powerful experiences with parents who have come to the community center and seen Love and Logic, and then they want to learn more about it. So that's Campus of Learners, and again, this is our family parent involvement opportunities that I think I've talked about. I talked about family plans. I talked about our events a little bit, but we do have partnerships. All of those events are possible through partnerships. So families come in and they have their family portrait taken every year. We have our attendance celebration every year, like I talked about. At our attendance celebration, we recognize kids who do not have chronic absences with some sort of reward. And then we also recognize parents. And then our community partners, like I just mentioned, are pretty important. And one of the ways that we have these nursing students from University of Portland, one of the ways that they've helped with parent engagement as far as just attendance goes is that they've developed sort of a handout for us that helps us to talk to parents about what does it really mean when your kid's just not feeling well and they don't want to go to school versus your kid is sick enough to stay home. And that's actually been a really good handout to use during those family plans. Let me see where I am here. So when we have, I'll move on to, we're just talking very briefly about my Skyline After School program and the Family College Focus program, the last programs on that list. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what do we do when we actually have a family that has attendance issues, or we have a family where a parent is struggling with how do I get my kid to go to school. Or, conversely, we've also had issues in the past where we've had parents who just have problems talking to their kids about, behavior or behavior in the neighborhood. And this is one place where we really draw on, and I'll go back to it, we really draw on those partnerships. We draw on relationships that we have with Vancouver Police Departments. There's actually a police officer coming today to our community center to talk to parents and kids about bullying. I mentioned the University of Portland nursing students. We have a really good relationship with the elementary school. It's very close to us. And those teachers tend to come once a week. They come a little bit more often around testing time, but they will come to help with homework or to help with particular issues that any kid is struggling with at school. So let me move forward and talk briefly about these two other programs that we have that have opportunities for parent involvement. So I talked about the after-school program and how we use sort of Love and Logic. I just talked to you about tutoring and the teachers and the fact that I use the developmental assets to plan the programs, and that helps me have an inroad to talk to parents about developmental assets just in general. And then this is their Family College Focus program, which is brand new. That's brand new this year. And there's opportunities for parents to be involved, but I can tell you that that's more of a challenge for us right now. And that part of that is because it's sort of with everybody in Vancouver housing. It's not just Skyline Crest or Campus of Learners people. In fact, we don't have any participants from those areas. So I struggle a little bit with how do I get people to stay engaged. And I have some mentors, basically they meet with a mentor and they have these 6 milestones that they complete in order to submit a college application. So some mentors are really successful, and then some mentors have a really hard time just kind of getting that relationship started. So again, that relationship seems to be really imperative to continuing involvement from both the parent and the kid, and in particular that applies to this Family College Focus program. We're talking about high school juniors and seniors, so it's a little more difficult to keep them engaged. We've tried some incentives. We have a Facebook presence now, sort of an online presence to help with that, and probably we're going to continue to look at how do we incentivize parents as well as kids. So I think that I'm kind of looking through my notes here. I think that's all that I really had. I have some resources here at the end. I'm just going to make sure I said everything that I wanted to say. I think that's it. These are the parent involvement opportunities that I mentioned with the after-school program, the Love and Logic classes that I talked about, the attendance awards that I talked about, the online access that parents have for the Family College Focus program. And then I haven't talked a lot about the results. I'm sorry, I've just kind of breezed past those. But those are the results. And so in particular with the Family College Focus program, we're very, we are still waiting to hear back from a lot of those high school seniors. So there's a couple that have submitted stuff, and they're waiting to hear back. There's a few that are already in college. They're already in Clark College because they're part of that Running Start program that we have. And I'll go back just so you guys can see it. So I'm sorry, I kind of went past it. But I'll go back to, the Skyline, and again, that's tiny. But we did have some changes in Skyline attendance when we were doing these program sort of components, when we were doing the collecting attendance. I don't know what impact that had, but it seems like it did have some impact, as well as doing these family plans definitely had some, some measure of effect on the attendance rates. Okay. I'm all set. Thank you.
That was super helpful, and I appreciated that you went back to the results because that's something that I think is of interest in my conversations with other housing authorities is just what metrics are people tracking, and then how are they focusing their efforts based on the metrics that they've selected. I just want to encourage anybody who has a question, you can note that either in public chat or you can use the Q&A bubbles that are above the presentation. And then I had a follow-up question, which was just about chronic absenteeism. If you could just share a little bit with us about your work with families, about some of the reasons that you found chronic absenteeism in the communities that you were working with, and then how by seeking that feedback you were able to work with families to address some of that.
I think that's been a really great opportunity for me to collect data and have a little bit of that quantitative experience, as well as talk to every one of those families face-to-face every year, because you see that there's a very complicated, there's a story behind each of those statistics. So I think that it's unique to everybody, but in general we see a lot of mental health in parents. We see a lot of depression. Mornings are particularly difficult for somebody who has any kind of post-traumatic issues or any sort of depressive issues. So we have parents who have a hard time getting their kids to school, and when kids are as little, in elementary school, they're not doing that on their own. I see a lot of parents who see that the attendance problem stems from, they think it's that their kid is sick. And often I see that they think that, and because it's probably true, that their kid is sick a lot, and also that parents are seeing chronic attendance. If there's chronic absences in a certain school year, parents are seeing that as very singular. They're seeing that as, we had a tough year this year, we don't normally do this. And the data shows something that's different. So there's these opportunities where if you have that relationship, like I talked about earlier, you're able to point out, I really hear what you're saying, but this looks the same as it did last year. And that's one of the things that we talk about with that attendance works material, is that that's extremely likely. You're about 13, I think it's 12 or 13 times more likely to have chronic absences in a year following a year that you had chronic absences, if that makes any sense. So if you've already done it once, you're much more likely to do it again. So parents are talking about the fact that, go ahead.
Oh,
I
want you to go ahead and finish your thought.
Yeah. So they're talking about the fact that they're not well. We're noticing that, mornings seem to be particularly difficult. Often if we have kids with behavior issues, parents will say, if I know that they didn't have a good night or if I know that they didn't have a good morning, it's easier for me to keep them home than to send them knowing that they're just going to call me to come and pick them up. So we have sort of a little bit of that as well. And then we have, quite frankly, I have a lot of parents that, in those younger grades that just aren't saying that, this is making a huge impact. And, honestly, I also have a lot of kids that have a lot of absences and are not doing too bad academically. So sometimes that's a difficult message. It's not so much of a cohesive message as I wish it was when I'm talking to parents. And so then you get to talk about things like, social development and those types of things and what else are they missing out on. And that's a very useful place for a kid to kind of pipe in and say, it is harder when I'm not there for 2 weeks to go back.
Thank you. We have two other questions that have come in. One is from Lynn Picard, and it's, do you track testing in relation to any absenteeism issues? We
don't. We have, the way, it's been a little convoluted, but the way that we have for the past 2 years collected attendance information is just by collecting report cards from families. And so families always have the option to say, I just want you to copy that part that has the attendance on there and then just give me the rest, and I don't want you to keep the rest. Many parents don't mind for us to keep that data. So we don't necessarily track that, but we do have it for most kids if it's included in the report card when we have it. So, yeah, officially that's not one of our outcomes.
Great. So that pertains to the next question, which Jennifer sent in, which is just a little bit more context about how, if you could provide a little bit more context about how the data is collected. So you mentioned the report cards. If you could tell us a little bit about whether the school district provides, what pieces the school district provides and what pieces come from families. That would be helpful.
Right now, it all comes from families, and that's part of that. Submitting that data as part of living in the campus of learners. In the future, I think that we'll be using some data sharing with the school district.
Great.
But again, and I wanted to keep in mind that this is such a small percentage of the number of kids that we house or subsidize, as an entire organization. And so if we're thinking about, how do we apply this to a much larger percentage of kids, I think that you definitely are looking at data sharing and also looking at, what specifically is it that you want to keep track of.
Great. Well, Prudence, thank you so much. We're going to transition to the other presentation at this point, but Abra will send out your contact information so that if people have additional questions that they want to follow up on, they can do that directly with you. Thank you so much. I think there was a lot of rich information that you shared, and good questions were asked. So with that, I'm going to go ahead
and thank you so much, Prudence. I just want to add also that in addition to sending out your contact information, I'm also happy to connect people to the organization that Prudence mentioned, Attendance Works. They are based in California, actually, but work in communities all across the country. So if absenteeism is a problem in your community or it's something that you want to focus on more, I'm happy to facilitate connections to that organization.
Great. So right now it looks like the next presentation is loading. Angie Nguyen is going to be giving the next presentation, and she's from Fresno Housing Authority. So we'll get Angie set here, and she's going to talk to us about some context about Fresno Housing Authority, some of their family engagement initiatives, some of their challenges, their funding, and some of the outcomes they have for children and youth who live in their communities. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Angie to set that. And again, please use the Q&A button anytime during the presentation. I'll collect the questions and then ask those of Angie at the end of the presentation.
Hi, good afternoon. As that was mentioned, I'm Angie Nguyen. I'm with the Fresno Housing Authority, and I appreciate the opportunity to share our emerging work around education and family engagement. Just a brief kind of heads up, some of you who were at the forum, I think it was last week or the week before, You might see some repetitive slides from Tracewell's presentation. I actually just got back from vacation yesterday, and I learned that I was doing this webinar in the morning. So, I quickly just snagged some of her slides and switched a few things up, added a few slides of my own. So some of it will be repetitive, but we are just kind of shifting the focus to specifically talk about the family engagement piece here. I also wanted to just say, that I think we're all at varying stages of this work. Some of us are further along than others. But I think what it's important is that, we're talking about it, we're thinking about it, we're doing something about it, and that we're sharing this information with each other, because it's unnecessary to reinvent the wheel. And, what works for one community can work somewhere else, sometimes with a few tweaks. But there really is no need to just reinvent stuff. So I think this opportunity to share hopefully will provide some insight, some ideas for you to be able to run with it and just be innovative in your own communities. Next slide. This slide just kind of shows a little bit of information about the residents that we serve. In our agency, we serve about 50,000 individuals. Amongst that, we have about 24,000 children who are between the ages of 0 to 18. So when we look at that information, we have this realization that, that is a lot of impact that we can have on a lot of little ones. So then what we did, next slide please, is that we took that information and then further broke it down to the age groups where we believe is like the preschool age, the elementary, and so forth, to really think about, well, what are we talking about? What are we looking at? What are the estimated grade levels of the children that we are serving within our programs? And then what we did after that was we aligned it with the school districts based on the school district boundary maps to then look at, okay, how many of our children attend schools in which districts, and then started those conversations with those school districts so that then we can go back and share that information with the parents and say, look, we are working with the school districts, we're working with the school principals. We want to make sure that we can provide your children, the best opportunities possible within the services that we can offer. Next slide. So we also did our own research. We know the information that the research has been done nationwide, statewide, but then we pulled some information about our county specifically. And that's information then that we share with the parents so that we can reiterate, the importance of attendance, of education, the impact that it has, like just simply missing school a few days, because someone has a headache, or, just really emphasizing the importance of what it means to read at grade level, and what it means to what those entrance profile means, like just explaining all of that information to the parents so that they thoroughly comprehend what that means to their child and to their education. So everything that we do, whether it be services that we're offering or if it's partners that we're inviting to provide services within our properties, we want to make sure that we're embedding those messages over and over and over again, so that at some point, they come to the realization that, this is important. Next slide. So doing the work, we have our primary and our secondary partners, and we really look at our primary partners in this work around education, obviously the school districts, but also the parents. The parents are a partner in this work. It is their child, but they also are a partner to us. They're a partner to the school. They're a partner to the teachers. And then the secondary partners are those service providers, the nonprofits, the community-based organizations, other public agencies such as Department of Social Services, or perhaps the CAP agency that may be in your community, or any other advocacy organizations, and even the universities. Sometimes the universities have, if education is one of the departments that has a strong point, then perhaps that can also be a partner, whether it be in the research area or, you know, maybe even coming in to provide services through their interns. But everyone has a role, and so we just try to make sure that we don't overlap on those roles, but that we're also making use of the expertise that exists out there. When we decided to shift our focus to this area, we decided that we wanted to align a lot of the work that we were doing with the school districts, and so we did a lot of the parent outreach and the engagement. Our service coordinators took the lead on that, and then we partnered with the school districts who offer a lot of programs. Some of them are about 6 to 10 weeks long that really do an introduction and an overview of things that are important for them as parents to know, how to access the parent portal, which has information about grades, attendance, so that they can monitor that, you know, and not have to rely on that old version of, you know, the automated phone call that goes to the house, you know, to tell you that your kid missed school. You know, there's a way for a parent to log in to a computer and to find that information for themselves and to monitor and to keep track of that. And so on our end, we want to make sure that we provide them with the information, teach them how to access it, provide the access via our computer labs that we have on our properties, or even just if we don't have a computer lab, then just letting them know where they can access a computer. Many of our county libraries have access to computers. Next slide. So, you know, what we decided, as we went through aligning and prioritizing our work, we established a theory of action. And, you know, with this, we're setting clear goals and monitoring those goals. We realized, you know, that we also don't have a lot of capacity, staff capacity. You know, we have a very limited team and so a lot of obligations. You know, some are committed to very specific tax credit properties. Others are committed to the Ross program. And so when you have one Ross coordinator that's having to cover approximately 6,000 square miles throughout Fresno County, which really equates to about an hour drive in any direction, whether that be west, east, or south, then you know, you spend a lot of time just traveling from place to place and very little time trying to connect with the residents. So we wanted to make the best of the staff time as well, so we needed to narrow down our goals and to be able to have a be successful in monitoring those goals. I think we also needed to scale that down a bit and then be able to really have these specialty areas. So what we've done going into this year is, you know, we've decided we're really going to focus on 3 areas, which is, you know, education, the wage progression, and health and wellness. And it doesn't mean that if something doesn't fit in that we're going to completely reject it, but it just means that it's probably not where we're going to put most of our efforts, and most likely won't put any of our funding into it as well. So we didn't want to just continue to spin our wheels doing a bunch of things that really weren't getting us a lot of results. But, you know, with this, we also know that, you know, patience and willingness to be wrong is expected. You know, we have to know how to fail forward. We need to learn from our mistakes. And so it's okay to say no. We don't chase money. We don't, sometimes it's better to go with partnerships rather than seek the grant yourself. And that has proven to really work out for us. You know, and it also is helping us just to filter out some things and to stay on target. This is the first year where we're really establishing those goals. I think the last 1 or 2 years, we've just been sifting through the stuff that we were doing and what was important, what was a priority. where were we getting most of the responses and the interactions from our families. And so now this year we're going into the implementation phase where we're really looking at, okay, this is what we expect to have outcomes. Last year we did enter into certain partnerships where we laid out some of those outcomes, and we're just now starting to see those numbers. So data is important, and but that also doesn't happen overnight. Next slide. So then what we did was we created this theory of action, and it's a visual for our theory of action, and go through this, and so when we have our key builders, which is our families, our funders, and our partners, and then the three areas of focus, around education specifically, is the parent engagement, the attendance, and the school readiness. And I apologize if this is too small. I know we got a little color happy here, and sometimes that makes it a little difficult to view. But we can also provide this to you via our website. The areas that we have targeted around fostering grade level reading, the smooth transition to middle school, and increasing high school graduation rates. We're doing things at all of our properties that really provide some specifics and assistance around that. So we have some tutoring programs set up. We provide reading corners. We've really started to create these comfortable, appealing little reading corners for the children, with the bean bags and the colorful mats and books. And, we talked about, do the parents or the children have to check the books in and out? And we just decided, if the kid wants to keep the book, then let them, then that's probably a good thing. So we're not, it's just one less thing we have to worry about. Many of the books are donated anyway. And so this is encouraging a lot of the parents to also access the library so that, their children can have some books to read at home. Next slide. The data sharing piece that I mentioned earlier, this is a big piece for the parents to become involved. Yes, the data sharing is between the schools, for now at least, is going to be between the school districts and the housing authority, and we're looking at right now it being just research and evaluation purpose specific. But when the parent waiver comes into play, that the parent, it can be a real scary thing for them. I think that no matter how much you tell them that no, it's not going to have anything to do with your ability to retain your housing, that there is still some kind of level of distrust there. And so this is where we rely heavily on the service coordinators to communicate that to them, that, it's not, and it's for our purposes to make sure that we're providing the right resources, that we're getting the right people here, that we're not wasting your time or anybody else's time, so that everyone, especially the child, can benefit. So when a parent does sign the waiver, this is big, but we have to assure them over and over that their eligibility won't be affected by any discoveries that come about through the sharing of information. Next slide. So funding the work. I know this is one of the questions that we often get, and our primary focus has been, we do have a nonprofit 501c3 that's an auxiliary to our agency, and their primary purpose is to raise funds for our services, particularly around education. It's called the Fresno Housing Education Corps. This was originally our PCC, and then we just we shifted its purpose, and they repurposed about 2 years ago. And since then, they've raised a little over $500,000 in the past 2 years to fund activities that support educational attainment, whether it be sometimes even for the parents, just paying for the GED exams, or if there are any incentives that we want to include in participation through some of our programming, then that's somewhere where it can come from. Very rarely, though, have we had to tap into that. I think some of our coordinators have done an excellent job in really connecting with partners and leveraging the resources that already exist. And then the funding that we have is really just filling the gap. I think that as housing authorities, you probably experience this a lot, where a lot of folks come and say, well, you know, they think that we have these deep pockets and really don't realize that the funds are very much tied to very specific activities. And so they ask, you know, well, what can you give us, or what can you put on the table? And when we turn it right back on them and ask them first, well, what do you got? You know, what can you contribute? And then we'll talk about how we can fill in the gaps. And then by the time the conversation's over, we really aren't contributing a whole lot other than the space and the assistance of our coordinators to do the outreach. Next slide. So with leveraging the resources and the partnerships, you know, this is an investment, and we have other partners, investors who are willing to dedicate their resources, who are willing to contribute for the cause, and they just need to know where they can channel their funding. And in our case, it's funneled through the Housing Education Corps. But in your case, if you don't have a nonprofit, that's okay. Like, you can partner with a community-based organization who is willing to receive the funds and then dedicate the resource to your residents, then you can channel the funding that way. So leverage those relationships with the investors or others who are willing who care about this, you know, and then that's one way to do it. You know, doing it yourself is not necessary. When it really comes down to it, it's a win-win for everyone. You know, the community partners, most of them have grants that they're receiving to do the work that they are doing, and they have outcomes that they need to reach. They have specific target populations, and most of the time it aligns very well with the residents that we have. And so, you know, they need us as much as we need them, and our residents are the ones who are going to benefit from this in the end. You know, and if you do have a theory of action or an action plan or whatever you call it, you know, share that. It doesn't do any good if it's stored in your hard drive somewhere, you know, or if you still print it out and put it on a binder collecting dust on a bookshelf. You know, it's not going to do anyone any good. Now that we've come up with ours, we plan on having a forum with community partners to share that with them so that they know this is the direction that we're going, and they can figure out how they can fit in, whether it's now or whether it's funding that they want to seek later. But they can always have that in the back of their mind that, you know, this is what the Housing Authority is doing, and if I apply for these funds, this would be a great way to partner with them. And so we've already had so many partners reach out to us in the development stage of the application of when they're responding to a proposal to say, hey, this is what we're thinking about. We've heard of the work that you're doing. What do you think about this? And we're going into it with not just a letter of support, but an actual plan of action. We've provided data to them about how many residents are intended to be served, the leveraging amount for them, for an in-kind resource for the use of our facility. There's just so much that we can do on the front end to help them get that award. And so, you know, again, and just continuing to embed the message in all of the activities so that they also know this is what the Housing Authority wants to do. This is how we can partner with them. And it's okay for us to be the ones to set the bar. It doesn't have to be our grant for us to say, this is what we want for our residents. These are our expectations. And by the way, we're still going to hold you accountable, even though you're the grantee. Because in the end, you know, these are still our residents. Our credibility is still on the line when it comes to them. If we don't deliver, then the chances of them trusting us and participating in something in the future, you know, you're really diminishing that. So we want to make sure that we have continue those open conversations with all of our partners about what is happening, provide feedback both ways. What can they do better, what can we do better to continue to improve the delivery of service. And so, we have found that it comes to a surprise to them when we start asking them, well, can we see the outcomes, or can we have a conversation about this because we don't think it's going in the direction that it was intended, or, setting up front saying, look, sure, we'll apply for this grant with you, but we also want you to include a county property, not just a property in the city. We find a lot of our properties in our county area, because it's very rural, there are very limited resources out there. So we're starting to put those conditions, and they're responding very positively. Next slide.
So we have about 4 more minutes to finish the presentation, and then we have several questions that have come in. So I just want to make sure we have time to address those questions. Thanks, Angie.
And so this next slide just shows you a little bit about one of our properties where we have a really large community center, and it's become kind of the popular kid when it comes to services, and everybody wants to do something at that property. So this is a little bit of the demographics that we have for that specific property. Next slide. We do have some partnerships with the school district, and Parent University is one of the programs that the school district has, and that one is very specific to the district. The other one that I mentioned on here, Abriendo Puertas / Opening Doors, that is actually a nationwide program. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can look that up, and both of them really talk about the developmental needs and stages of the children, the advocacy. They have various modules, but what they really do is it helps raise the comfort level of the parent to maneuver the school system, and it teaches the parent how to balance their responsibilities, their personal experiences, and then, as one of our coordinators said, their own reactions to their child's reactions. So it also blends a little bit of the family unification, family maintenance piece in that. And attendance in that has been pretty successful. I would say that we do have an average about where we lose maybe 3 people per cohort, which isn't too bad when the cohort extends like a period of 6 to 10 weeks, depending on the module. So to keep their attention for that long and to only lose about three parents, that's not bad. Next slide. The other is First 5 Fresno County. So that one is specific to the state of California, but what I really wanted to mention was their use of AmeriCorps, and AmeriCorps is a national program. And so AmeriCorps has both where you have the general membership, the core members, where you can actually use them to implement activities and work, and then there's the other AmeriCorps Vistas, where most of that is capacity building, not necessarily direct service work, but capacity building, and that's just an excellent resource to have that gives you that additional kind of person or people to help you execute some of this work. The First 5 and AmeriCorps partnership did a mobile classroom that really facilitated child development activities between the parent and child on our properties. And just anecdotally, there have been some instances where through those activities there was just discovered that maybe that child wasn't quite where they needed to be, and then with the referral to the proper agency, it was determined that there were some developmental delays that had it not been caught then, it really could have been probably very damaging to that child and to their self-esteem and just their overall academic achievement in the future. Next slide. And Reading and Beyond is another, this is an example of, it was an agency that was going to apply for funds. We were thinking about applying for it, but then instead decided to partner with them and then have them do their work at all of our properties, and including some of their community centers that they have access to. And so one of the things that they did was they had the summer academy. Here's a little bit of information that they did. And this focused mainly on the summer reading loss piece, and what we learned after the there was a developmental reading assessment conducted before and after, and what it measured was that 47% of them maintained their level, and 53 of them had actually improved it. So that was very encouraging, and it's something that we still have in progress. Next slide. And then just some final thoughts. Tell your story over and over to whoever's going to willing to listen to you. Get the right people on board. They have to be in it for the long haul, because this isn't going to happen overnight. And really just strive for progress, not perfection. Because if you try to be perfect and try to get it right the first time, you're going to be greatly disappointed. And then the final slide just has my contact information. And I'm done.
Angie, thank you so much for sharing so much information. We know this is not a lot of time to cover a lot of detail, so thank you for so thoughtfully doing that. We have two quick questions, so just really briefly to try to keep within our time constraints. The first one, two different people asked, which is, could you just tell us a couple ways in which your nonprofit has raised money for educational purposes?
Yeah, so one big event that we have, which is our biggest fundraiser, is we have an annual wine festival. And so that wine festival sells the ticket. The wine is all donated by a local donor, a local winery, and then we have the event at a private home out in the countryside, and it's huge, it's beautiful, and they also just let us use their home. It's their lawn at no cost. And so we also get additional funds, not just through the ticket sales, but through some sponsorships of the wine festival. And then we have a silent auction, and then last year for the first time we had a live auction. And we do things from a helicopter ride that the sheriff's department used to offer, to even one of my staff had donated her dog sitting services, or pet sitting services. And then we also took a chance last year and did one of those Royal Hawaiian deals, a couple of nights, for a certain price, and capped the sale of tickets. And that brought in a fairly good amount of money. And then we also have a local jewelry store that for the last few years they've donated a diamond necklace, and that is also auctioned off. So that is actually our biggest fundraiser. The other piece has been through the annual recognition event. When we have that, we recognize residents in some various categories for their achievements, and then we invite a lot of our donors to that. And when we do the invitation, a letter goes out with that, and there's also a request for a monetary donation. And so some funds have come in that way. But when we switched over to this model of the Ed Corps, AJ, who is the director of the Ed Corps, she is constantly meeting with potential donors. And just last month, she met with he's a Spencer, so he's in construction, and he agreed to match. Was it 100,000? Up to 100,000, I believe. So so it's just also sometimes those one-on-one conversations. We also have had conversations with the university, and the university is willing to match scholarships.
That is tremendous. I think we have several other questions that have come in, but we're running short on time. So what I would just encourage folks to do is to reach out to either Prudence or Angie directly. And this is a great space to just connect with our colleagues who are doing work that we're interested in learning from. So thank you, Prudence, and thank you, Angie. And Abra, thank you for convening us today. And thank you for all of the participants on the phone call.
Yep. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.